everybody. Welcome back to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going to talk about LCDs, viewfinders, and monitors, and which our preferences are, the pros and cons of each one, and why we decided to use the ones that we do. So Alex, if you would like to take it away and let everyone know what your preference is.
Well, yeah, it's very much a mirrorless discussion here because that option of being able to use properly all three is really a mirrorless thing. And for anyone who's not a mirrorless user, the great thing about the mirrorless camera is all three of them will give you, up to the minute live view of what your lens is showing. So it's really a choice between the advantages and disadvantages of each in terms of viewing position and how that affects your camera, the ergonomics of shooting, the whole feeling of using the camera, and potentially with different subject matter, how you might want to vary them all. I think the first thing I would say before I answer the question about which my favorite is, which is Viewfinder, before I answer that question, is to say that I think the LCD screen is often underrated. And one of the big plus points of the LCD screen is that it's really nice to use. And on most housings, you don't have to buy any sort of expensive accessory to allow you to get the most out of it. As it is really good. I think one thing that can be a frustration with some housings is that the housing doesn't offer you any ability to move the LCD screen. And I would say generally as a photographer, being able to angle your LCD screen a little bit back towards you makes for a more comfortable shooting situation than having it flat against the back of the camera. And not all housings allow that angling back. So if you are planning to choose a housing and you are planning to use the LCD as your main way of framing up on your mirrorless camera, do have a look at the housing and see what flexibility it gives you for moving the LCD screen, just tilting it. The top part can be against the back of the camera, but the bottom part, the more out it comes, the more comfortable it can be to shoot. That angle, though, can be a bit annoying if you shoot a lot of verticals because you've always then got that angle in when shooting verticals. But I just thought I'd mention that as a beginning point because I know your favourite and my favourite in this differ, which is why I thought this was a really nice discussion. So I love EVFs on the cameras. I love the electronic viewfinder on the last generation of mirrorless cameras. For me, for many years, the EVF was the reason I didn't go to mirrorless. And then it became the reason I went to mirrorless, which is just because of the advancement in the technology and how enjoyable an EVF is to use. I particularly like an EVF with an angled viewfinder. I think it creates a brilliant, bright view down a nice, dark, shaded eyepiece. So you get a really almost cinematic view of what you're shooting with the real ability to concentrate very carefully on the details. I find that view very inspiring. And I like the fact that optical viewfinders can be adjusted so that however you are as a photographer, however your eyesight is, you can, through your camera, have a fantastic view of what you're shooting and also that same view of what you're reviewing and that same view of all the menus and all the settings and all that sort of thing. So I really like an EVF. I am still quite traditional as a photographer. I like that viewfinder. I like the inspiration it gives me. And it shoots my way of shooting. I do use the LCD from time to time, and I keep my LCD flat on the back of the camera because the times I use it are often when the camera's a bit away from my body, it's not my main way of shooting, or I'm shooting straight up or straight down when the angled viewfinder is harder to use. But I'm actually really interested in your answer to this question, Matt, because you're one of the few photographers I know who routinely chooses a monitor for a lot of your shooting. And I think you use that really effectively, particularly in a lot of the environments that you shoot in, which involve getting the camera low, working those upward angles from right down on the seabed. And I'm really curious to hear why you decided to go down that route and how you make it work.
So for the longest time, I loved the 45, especially the 45-degree viewfinder, and I still like them.
You're saying you've evolved beyond me, really. It's kind of
yes. I will touch on real quick though. I do still like using the LCD for certain things. So for things like sharks, where I can have the camera up at my eye level, and I can just look straight through, I'll still use the LCD for that kind of thing, because it saves the bulk of a viewfinder or a monitor. But I love shooting with a monitor, and I don't anticipate, at least for macro things or non-pelagic things, probably going back to a regular, even an angled viewfinder. The monitor is just so nice. So I don't have the best vision. So looking through the viewfinder, and admittedly, I have not used any of the new generation, like big, huge viewfinders from like Nauticam, for example. But the monitor that I have it's a 5-inch Kraken monitor. It's very bright, so even in the middle of the day, I don't have any trouble seeing it. And what I found is it makes composition very, very easy because you have a much bigger screen to look at, so you can see every single detail on the screen. So there, things that in the past I might not have noticed looking through the viewfinder are much more glaring and obvious to me now, so I can eliminate them. And like you said, a lot of the environments I dive in a lot, it's important to be able to get the camera as low as possible, and having the monitor, just being able to tilt it in any direction, has been really, really valuable to me. And for example, the other day I was diving here locally and I found a tiny little frogfish. The spot it was sitting, if I'd tried to use the LCD or a viewfinder, I would not have been able to get myself behind the camera because it was sitting just off of a dock piling, and the only thing I could do was put the camera in that space, and I just tilted the viewfinder, or not the viewfinder, I apologize, the monitor towards myself, and then could shoot it that way without having to actually be behind the camera, which was really
I can see that being very, very valuable and give you a real advantage in some situations. So what I'm sort of, because I'm quite curious about going down that route myself now. Where do you position the monitor? Do you have it always kind of over the midpoint of the camera? How do you kind of mount it on the camera? Do you always have it, in line with where the lens is? Or do you have it off to one side, or where do you have it?
So on my housing, which I now have a new Isoda housing, which I love, by the way, I have it mounted on the crossbar that goes up top. So there is a mounting point on the housing itself, but I don't have the proper size ball mount for that, so I don't have it there. So you could mount it directly over the top of the or over the lens if you wanted to. Mine is a bit offset. I haven't noticed any issues with lining things up or anything like that. And one of the other reasons I went with a monitor especially is because for use with the EMWL, you can cut out the middle relay part, which improves your image quality, saves you a bunch of money, and you don't have to get that reversed viewfinder, which admittedly I have not used, so I don't know how good it is. But you can easily flip the screens on monitors so that you can see even though your settings will still be upside down, your image is the right way, and you can compose really easily that way. And
it means that if you take the EMWL off during the dive, you just flip the monitor back to normal, which is something you can't do with the optical viewfinder.
Yeah. So and at least with my monitor, that takes maybe 5 to 10 seconds to flip it back the other way. So it's a really easy process. But I think the most valuable thing I've found, besides being able to see a big screen, is the ability to have the camera wherever you want it and still be able to see what you're doing. Especially if I dive in a lot of mucky environments, so being able to stay up off the bottom and just have the camera down there is really nice. And it makes compositions on even small subjects, whether it's macro or shooting fisheye or the EMWL, it makes it really, really easy, and you can kind of do some new stuff. Another example, last night I was out shooting and I had there was a frogfish and a seahorse perched right next to each other up towards the surface. And if I had tried on a bridge piling, and if I had tried to be up there with them looking through a viewfinder, the shot wouldn't have been there. So I was able to hold the camera up and tilt the monitor down towards me and just look through it that way and compose much more easily than I would have been otherwise.
It must be really nice as well for kind of wide angle shooting, where you often, the angle you need to hold the camera is often down and below something. Yep. And that's quite, if you get to, if you go into that position yourself as a photographer, often your bubbles are then going up through and hitting what you're going to shoot, say just on a reef environment. Kind of the classic wide angle reef shot is you get slightly below a subject, get close to it and shoot up. And obviously, being able to hold your camera out at arm's length, tilt it down into that position and still have this fantastic view, I can see being very, very attractive. I need to come up with some cons because your arguments are all very persuasive.
The biggest con is obviously it adds size and weight to your rig,
Mm.
which is one of the reasons I don't use it for things like sharks or anything like that, because it'll just slow you down or kind of get in the way, and it's not necessary.
Yeah, quite a bit of
Um,
extra drag on a dive.
yeah, but if you're diving in, you know, more slow-paced environments,
Mm.
or especially muck diving, things like that, cold water environments, it's for me, it has become indispensable. And even if you know, if I don't think I'm going to be using it, I'll still have it on there just in case because, 9 times out of 10, I end up shooting with the monitor anyway and never looking through
Mm.
the LCD. So I really enjoy it. Like I said, I don't think I will go back to shooting without one for anything besides, fast moving pelagic things. And you get used to the size and the weight of it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty of times I shoot with a bigger rig with long strobe arms and that sort of thing. A couple of things that I would say, I would think when I shoot super macro, I've become very good at calibrating kind of my body to subject distance. So for me, the best way to aim super macro is to know the focusing distance in front of your super macro element in front of the lens and move the lens looking over the top of the housing to that distance before you even start going to the viewfinder.
Yeah.
But I would say with there's definitely, I don't know, I guess a big part of my technique for super macro is based around the muscle memory of the position of the camera relative to the subject. And I would say, and the viewfinder is the piece that kind of locks all that together. In that I know if I get to here and get the viewfinder to there and my subject is there, I'm in the right distance. I would find with a monitor that you're kind of moving around, you'd lose one of those reference points for that, which I would find. So, how is it super macro and the aiming and everything like that? I know you don't do as much super macro because
Yeah, so frankly, I haven't shot. I don't know the last time I even had a diopter in front of my in front of my lens. But for normal macro, I haven't found it to be an issue.
yeah,
And one thing that I will say that everyone who gets a 45-degree viewfinder probably experiences this to some extent to start
mm.
is the angle is different. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to because you're looking down slightly and you're not looking straight through. So it can take a bit of time to get used to. I haven't had that same experience with a monitor, and maybe that's because I'm used to a 45-degree viewfinder, so I'm used to having it at a different angle.
It's just the feeling that because the monitor is not at a fixed position. I think one of the things with the 45 is you get used to
Yeah, yeah.
its exact angle relative to your handle and everything like that. And I think that the monitor, because it's ultimately endlessly variable in its position, you don't have that as kind of as a locking.
So I will say there are times, specifically with macro, where I'll look at where the front of the lens is pointing to make sure that I'm in the general vicinity, and then kind of
Yeah.
figure it out from there. Similar to what you said.
I
with
kind of
Super
I
Mac.
do that with the 45, so it's not a
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Another time that I really value the EVF 45 is in very, very bright conditions, such as the ones behind me here on my green screen. But if it's a really classic example for that, something that I do every year, is shooting at Stingray City in Cayman. It's very, very bright there on the sand, and you cannot see the LCD of the camera very well at all because it's just too bright. So you can't judge exposure. And with an SLR, it was a real pain because you through the optical viewfinder, you could see and shoot the shot perfectly fine. You then wanted to review it so you could check your exposure was correct, and you'd look on the LCD screen and you couldn't see the LCD screen.
yeah.
You could see the composition, but you just couldn't judge the exposure because it was so bright, the ambient light. Does the and one of the things I love about the EVF on the mirrorless camera is that, of course, now through the viewfinder, I can review in a lovely shaded environment, however bright or dark the ambient light is, and have a really good feeling for what my exposure is. I would be concerned that with an external monitor, maybe it would also suffer some of those issues, that just in a very bright environment, it might be hard to judge exposure.
So I haven't. I can only speak for the monitors I've used. But and I have a good friend who uses one as well. And I will say his monitor is not as bright, and I won't say what brand it is, but his monitor is not as bright, and it's significantly more difficult to see during the day what's happening on his monitor. The Kraken one is very bright to the point where sometimes I'll actually dial the brightness down a little bit. But I haven't. The only issue I've found with that is on, like you said, in those super bright conditions, and I've had it in very bright conditions at the bridge in a couple feet of water, is glare is more difficult than anything else. It's not necessarily the brightness, it's that you might get some reflection off of the glass
Yeah.
front of the monitor. So you might just have to angle it a bit differently to see.
It's a very
But
unusual situation, though.
yes, but in terms of the actual brightness, I haven't had any issues with that. And generally, I use it knocked down a couple notches from full brightness, especially on darker dives,
Yeah.
so that it's not blowing my face out. But
Yeah. And how's the battery life?
so the monitor I've shot it on 3 dives now and haven't charged the battery. I
Yeah.
assume if you're running it at full power, like at full brightness, and you're doing 2-hour dives back to back to back, it'll run down. I think it's rated for 3 hours at full brightness
Yeah.
on a charge, but I have not shot it at full brightness, and I suspect you'll probably get considerably more life out of that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think most people. I mean, you be realistic. I mean, in that the camera batteries now generally, if you take a lot of pictures and you do good diving, they're going to last 2 dives on most mirrorless cameras. So if you're opening your housing to do that, you might as well change everything else as well.
Yeah, and it's at least with mine, I don't know how some of the other monitors are. Mine's just you unscrew the battery cap, pop it out, and you can throw another one in if you need to, and it takes 10 seconds, if that.
Yeah.
So I have 2 batteries for it, just so that if the occasion arises, I can throw a new one in really quickly so that it's charged.
And unlike a camera or a strobe battery, if it did go flat in a dive because you were pushing it, it's not as if it stops you taking pictures.
Yeah, because you can go.
So,
You can just
so
switch it to
you're
the
still,
LCD.
so it's like, I've lost a bit of capability, but I can still shoot as many pictures as I like. So it's not a critical thing in the same way.
One other thing that I'll say real quick that I've really enjoyed is I'll use the monitor almost to mimic the LCD, where I'll tuck it down behind the back of the camera, and like angle it up slightly, similar to how you said some cameras will sit slightly angled in the housing, and then I can just essentially have a bigger LCD screen behind the camera, so I can still shoot it that same way.
Yeah.
If I choose to do so, but usually I have it up just because it's easier.
Yeah, I think that can be quite a nice way, particularly for wide angle shooting, and with the autofocus now being so good, almost being able to have that rapport with particularly if you're shooting a model or something, just like a scuba diver diving around a wreck, actually being able to watch them with your eyes and just be able to check down on a monitor is a really nice way to shoot. You're holding the camera, so you keep an eye line with the model. You can be watching in detail where their eye line is, when they're breathing, that sort of thing, which can be quite hard to see when you're looking at them on a small screen. And then you're just checking your overall exposure with the thing. I think that I can definitely see myself using a monitor a lot, and for lots of different types of shooting. But yeah, I think I might try very hard to see if I can get my hands on one before I next do a muck diving trip. I think it would be really interesting to see how it frees you up in some of those situations, particularly when you really want to get the camera in a certain place, but you can't physically get yourself behind it. I see that being a massive advantage.
Yeah, and like I said, I think at least for me, it has made a big difference in my compositions, because you can seeing it bigger is almost how you would see it on a computer screen or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can see details. At least I can see details a lot more easily than I could on a viewfinder LCD. So that's been very helpful for me as well. And I really, really enjoy the monitor capabilities. I resisted it for a very long time, and then I got one. I was like, oh, this thing's awesome.
It's really great, really interesting. I think, and something I think a lot of photographers will be interested in, because in my experience, it's, just 1 or 2% of serious shooters are using an external monitor. Almost the majority are, using viewfinders and things. So I think if it does, people do start to catch the bug, it could be a real transformation in our community.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's a great place for us to end. Really interesting and really useful discussion. And maybe there's some money going to be going out of my account soon. So. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.